Although my focus was supposed to be on the persistent hum of my phone, the background showed nothing but charts of deployment timelines and data migration plans. As I was presenting a security rollout to the executive team, my phone started vibrating, 3, 4, 5 times in rapid succession. I stopped speaking. Interrupting a presentation, especially one this significant, is something I never do, but a knot formed in my stomach. I apologized, saying, "Just one moment, please," and stepped outside. Once in the corridor, I unlocked my phone and gazed at the screen. The initial message I read was from Diane Marlowe. It said, "You're not welcome. Hazel doesn't want you present." I paused, not quite believing what I saw and certain I was mistaken. As if on cue, another message appeared. "There's a shift in plans. Hazel thinks I've made the wedding revolve around myself. Lucas's parents said they'd chip in, but only if things are peaceful." My fingers started to shake. I kept scrolling down. "Please don't make this a bigger deal than it is. She wants everything about this one day to turn out flawlessly. I'm hoping you'll be able to see where we're coming from." See where I'm coming from? After I'd covered the down payment for Alderwood Manor and paid for the catering, photographer, and rental fees, over $83,000 in total, all withdrawn from my account, with the slim, persistent hope that it might draw us together again. And all of a sudden, I was being cut out, scrubbed away from the celebration I had made possible. A tightness gathered behind my eyes, but I forced myself to stay upright. My heart pounded in my ears. I messaged my mother with a single word. "Why?" Her typing indicator blinked on my screen for ages, then finally vanished without a response. When I returned to the conference room, the air felt dense and hard to breathe. I picked up the remote and finished my talk, relying on muscle memory to guide me. It seemed like no one noticed anything different. Or maybe people noticed, but chose not to say anything. That evening, I perched on my sofa, the text thread still open and my teeth pressed tightly together. I wasn't merely left out. I was thrown away. For the first time ever, instead of feeling crushed inside, I felt myself ignite. Back in our home on Maple Row, there was never an official division of responsibilities. Things just fell into place. Hazel Marlowe ended up with the radiance, while I ended up with the checklist. When our pipes froze and ruptured one winter, I was the one searching online for urgent plumbers, while my mother nervously walked circles. If Raymond Marlowe let the electric bill slip his mind once again, I was the one who contacted the utilities and arranged payments. At that point, I was just 12. Every time I mentioned this unevenness, my mother would always say that my sister was still working out who she was. "You've always simply had the answers," she'd add. I started to use my capability as a shield, even though it sometimes left me uncomfortable. Hazel breezed through classes, relying on deadlines and her magnetic personality. I spent late nights perfecting essays, organizing binders by color, and establishing order where there hadn't been any. My sister spun her way through cheerleading rehearsals, while I signed up to help out at science fairs. I completed FAFSA applications on my own. By the time I graduated as valedictorian, everyone just seemed relieved that I hadn't disappointed them. I left home for college in Portland with nothing but 2 duffel bags and a quiet vow to never depend on anyone the way everyone had depended on me. 5 years later, I crossed the stage summa cum laude with a job offer already lined up. I put in long hours at work, saved every dollar I could, and lived in a tiny studio with walls so thin I could hear everything, while others celebrated their first paychecks with champagne. When our startup was acquired, I woke up to find myself a millionaire. There was no announcement, no fancy car, just the simple fact of a changed bank balance and the very first sense of freedom I'd ever felt. That was when the phone started ringing. My father's car broke down. My mother's hours at work were reduced. My sister's lease situation took a turn for the worse. I stepped in to help each time, not because anyone asked me, but because it was second nature for me to respond that way. I was expected to predict what would be needed before anyone said a word. So, when my sister got engaged, pitching in with the wedding just felt like another silent duty I was supposed to fulfill. Everything kicked off with a call just after midnight. Her voice came through the phone, alive with excitement. Lucas proposed on a boat as the sun went down. It was absolutely perfect, Hazel told me. Still half asleep, I was glad for her. She sounded like she'd stepped straight out of the Pinterest board she used to scroll during our high school years. Hazel said she dreamed of a modest celebration, something warm and personal. Then she brought up Alderwood Manor, a venue I knew charged at least $42,000 just to reserve the essentials. Don't stress, she hurried to say. Lucas Brennan's parents are considering helping out, and I know my mother and father can't contribute much, but we'll make it work. Maybe I could handle a few of the smaller things. I agreed immediately, not even pausing to ask what that would really mean. I never hesitated to say yes. A couple of weeks later, she slid a document with numbers my way. Her wedding spreadsheet. The spreadsheet sprawled across the table at brunch. Its neat color-coded sections were as intimidating as they were organized. Our overall budget came to $108,000. Despite what was claimed, small expenses actually covered everything from the full Alderwood Manor deposit to the photographer, catering, and a dozen other basics. We're just waiting to hear back from Lucas Brennan's parents, she told me, her gaze soft with what felt like a rehearsed vulnerability. They haven't completely agreed yet. It only hit me later that "we'll figure it out" was actually code for "you'll figure it out." By that point, I'd already sent over the deposit to Alderwood Manor and settled the first bill for the caterer. The phone calls felt endless. The florist urgently requested a quick payment. The wedding gown I adored was about to be discontinued. The band Lucas liked unexpectedly had an opening, but we needed to act immediately. Every situation was treated like a crisis. Each time, it felt as though only I could provide a solution. I kept up with spreadsheets, meticulously logged receipts, and kept telling myself that after the wedding, I would finally be able to exhale. Once again, I hoped they would acknowledge that none of it would have been possible without me. Yet as I sorted through the third invoice and responded to the fifth urgent quicker pay request, I realized I'd gone from being a sister to becoming an invisible financier, never captured in the memories, but always the one paying for everything. When I finally brought up the topic of what my fiancé's family was pitching in, my sister paused. She told me they didn't know yet, and said it might happen eventually. She just insisted that things were tense right now. Of course, things weren't so tense that they skipped the spa getaway they'd planned for Hazel Marlowe's bachelorette celebration. It began with tiny exclusions. There was a group chat that I never got invited to. There was a meeting with the florist scheduled conveniently during my quarterly review at work. I only found out about the cake sampling session because Hazel mentioned it on her Instagram story. Every time I asked, Hazel provided an explanation. I wasn't sure you'd have time. I thought my mother could go with me instead. I was going to let you know, but it happened really suddenly. I wanted to trust her. I reassured myself that she was simply under too much pressure. However, as the days passed, her behavior settled into a consistent routine. I ended up covering expenses for decisions where my input was never requested. Still, I continued to be present. I rearranged my calendar, caught early trains, and made every effort to rejoin a planning process that had subtly left me behind. On one particular day, I stopped at a small hotel close to my sister's apartment to deliver the finalized contracts she'd requested. I grabbed a coffee at Oak and Lantern Cafe and noticed my sister, Hazel, seated 2 tables over, deep in conversation with her maid of honor, Taylor Evans. My body froze when I caught the sound of my name. "She's acting like such a control freak," my sister Hazel remarked, her voice clear enough for anyone to hear. Just because she's footing the bill doesn't mean it's her wedding, Taylor responded, tasting her latte. Taylor added, "Yeah, but at least you won't end up in debt, right?" Hazel let out a small laugh. I mean, small. The price of dealing with her spreadsheets and subtle jabs felt steep to me. I just wish my mother would transfer the money and avoid getting further involved. I retreated before they noticed me, my hands trembling. That evening, I looked over the meticulously color-coded budget I had spent hours crafting, suddenly uncertain whose interests I was really serving. Until now, I believed I was being helpful and supportive, filling the role of the reliable sister. But as it turned out, my presence itself was the actual issue. Things only deteriorated further the following week. A message arrived in the middle of our Wednesday stand-up, tucked among quicker pay notifications and code deployment messages. A relative from Lucas Brennan's family, someone I had barely interacted with, sent me a text. "Hey, sorry to hear you won't be there. Hope you're okay." I felt confused as I read the message. Then another text appeared. "Hazel said you've been having episodes. I had no idea things were this serious." A chill ran through my hands at the word episodes. While I was on my break, I decided to call my mother. She answered by the third ring, her tone already defensive. "Ivy, I plan to reach out to you this evening." "What story did she tell them?" I pressed. There was a stretch of silence. "She only said you've had a lot on your plate lately. That apparently the wedding stress might be affecting how I'm acting." "A lot on my plate?" "So that's the latest spin?" I said, keeping my tone even. "So, rather than confess that I've covered 80% of her wedding costs while she's paid me back with silence and disdain, she just implied to Lucas's family that I'm emotionally unstable. She didn't mean for it to come out that way. She's just dealing with enormous pressure." "Ivy," my mother's voice became gentle, as if that could fix anything. "Lucas Brennan's parents are finally beginning to accept the idea of this wedding. My mother's just scared something might upend it. And that something is me." She said nothing. "It isn't me who's at fault," I murmured, mostly for my own reassurance. "The real issue is that Diane is being dishonest with everyone, including you. But you'd sooner defend the fiction than—" "I have to be honest. Things are messy. Actually, it's pretty straightforward." I ended the call before my mother could continue speaking. Remaining in my office, I gazed at my face in the black reflection of the monitor, feeling something fundamental within me realign. It wasn't frustration or grief, but an unmistakable understanding. It became clear that they would never truly notice me, not unless I stopped making it so easy for myself to disappear. By the next morning, I took a step none of them could have anticipated. I couldn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I found myself at my kitchen table, clutching a mug of cold tea beside the haunting glow of my laptop, surrounded by stacks of printed agreements, endless email chains, and spreadsheets etched into my memory. Meticulous records were everywhere. There were receipts for the venue retainer, the catering, the floral orders, the photographer, and all the rentals, with 48 planning documents, all carefully color-coded and constantly revised throughout the previous 8 months. Everything was filed away in folders labeled Hazel Marlowe and Lucas Brennan Wedding. I launched a blank document and began typing. 3 categories stood at the top: pending payments, cancelable services, and non-refundable expenses. I meticulously traced each dollar, scrutinizing every detail. There were no tears or rage, just a sense of precision, as if I were performing delicate surgery. My first step was tackling the venue. The Alderwood Manor contract included a partial refund policy, provided I gave notice more than 96 hours in advance. I reached out to the venue coordinator, Peggy Randall, with whom I had corresponded extensively for months. "Hello, Peggy. This is Ivy Marlowe," I said. "I'm contacting you to cancel my reservation." She hesitated briefly. Would you mind sharing why you're no longer able to attend the wedding you paid for and why you can't continue supporting it? To Peggy Randall's credit, she respected my situation and didn't press for more details. She carefully explained each step of the cancellation, made sure the refund would be processed, and even offered to provide documentation for my tax records. After that, I moved on to the florist, the DJ, the equipment rental agency, and the bartending crew. Patiently, I unraveled each arrangement I had carefully orchestrated. Most of the vendors responded with empathy. There were a few people I knew were already aware of the situation. Apparently, news had traveled quickly. The photographer spoke softly, telling me, "You're not the first this has happened to, but you may be the boldest." Before nightfall, I managed to cancel everything I could. I moved the partial reimbursements into my savings account and then signed out. Afterward, I opened the shared planning folder that everyone could access, though no one else had ever contributed to it. I saved copies of all the files, made sure they were backed up, and then deleted them from the cloud. Just like that, it was gone. Each seating chart, every estimate, and all the spreadsheets. I closed my computer and let out a breath. Only then did I realize just how much space it had taken up in my life, physically, mentally, and emotionally. For the first time in many months, I experienced a sensation of being unburdened. That was when my phone rang. I knew without checking that it would be my sister, Hazel, calling. As soon as I picked up, Hazel was already shouting, "What in the world is wrong with you?" Hazel's voice cracked as it came through the speaker. "The venue contacted me just now. The floral designers pulled out. It feels like everything is unraveling, and you are to blame." I didn't so much as react. "You made it obvious I wasn't wanted. You're destroying my world because of your envy." Quietly, I replied, "No, that's not true. I'm taking my life back for myself. You wanted an impeccable wedding that excluded me. Now you're left with neither." She began to cry and ended the call. 5 minutes later, Diane Marlowe called me, but I sent it straight to voicemail. Immediately after, Raymond Marlowe tried calling, and I received a stream of messages that I ignored. I put them all on my block list, not out of rage, but for my own safety. I opened a web browser and started searching for cabins along the Oregon coast. I found one tucked away in the woods near a shoreline I remembered from a road trip years ago. No internet, no cell reception, only peace. I reserved it for 7 days, filled a duffel bag, and walked away the following morning before the rest of Portland was awake. No announcement, no explanation. By the time anyone noticed I was gone, I was already riding the ferry, the cool breeze brushing my cheeks. With my phone powered off, I simply watched as the shore faded into the distance. I wasn't acting out of spite. Instead, I felt only stillness and a sense of openness. As the boat glided toward the highlands, I felt a tension inside me begin to unwind, something that had been tight for years. The cabin turned out to be more modest than I had imagined. There was just a single room, a wood stove, and a weathered kitchen table that soon became a haven for me. I made a conscious choice to leave my laptop behind. My phone remained untouched and powered off. The quiet that surrounded me wasn't empty. It felt like a presence I hadn't experienced in a long time. Every morning, I wandered along damp paths, surrounded by the rich fragrance of pine needles and moss. On the second day, I started carrying a journal with me. It wasn't one of my structured workbooks or planners, but instead filled with blank, unruled pages where I could put down my thoughts, all the words I'd always kept to myself. I described the birthday my sister Hazel skipped. I wrote about the late nights I spent sorting out my father's taxes. I remembered the New Year's Day when I bought gifts for everyone, and no one seemed to realize. The sensation of being relied on but never truly valued haunted me. I was always included for what I could do, not who I was. On day 5, I stumbled upon a waterfall hidden at the far end of a narrow trail. I chose a spot close by, then tore up every journal entry, releasing the strips piece by piece into the rushing water. The act felt both juvenile and sacred. As I departed the highlands, my grief accompanied me, but its nature had changed. It felt sharper, yet it was mine, given up willingly. Before I even unpacked my bags, I scheduled an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Marie Farrow didn't demand a full explanation right away. Her first question was about who I was, separate from being the one who fixed everyone else's problems. That was the question that finally made me cry. Things began gradually, unlearning routines, asserting boundaries, and unpacking the stories my family told. I was present for each weekly session. I quit defending my emotions. I no longer felt compelled to clarify my identity. The sadness remained, but eventually it stopped overtaking every interaction. As the holidays rolled around, I passed on going back to Salem. I carved out my own traditions and made different plans. Spring slipped in, almost unnoticed. There weren't any dramatic changes, just small choices that added up. I updated my email sign-off. I stepped out of the family group chat. I ignored any query that started, "Can you just?" I redirected the effort I'd poured into handling others' emergencies, now offering a tech scholarship for girls at rural schools and a monthly gift to a tree planting program in the Highlands, those same woods where I'd learned to breathe again. Giving freely, without a sense of obligation, felt right. My therapist, Dr. Marie Farrow, described it as emotional repurposing. She pointed out that I had devoted years to being the family's designated emergency contact, to the point that I had forgotten what it meant to belong to myself. I spent Harvest Festival with my colleagues, all of us following YouTube recipes and laughing at our own charred pies. On New Year's Day morning, I sipped coffee in a home filled with friends who traded board games for judgment. During therapy, I explored the roles I played in my family. Emotional delegation, Dr. Marie Farrow called it. Dr. Farrow explained, they used you as their vessel, pouring every ounce of distress into you and labeling it intimacy. I agreed, having always sensed this, though I never had the language for it. I simply had never articulated it before. We covered guilt as well. I shared how my parents taught me that it was my responsibility to ensure everyone else felt at ease. I described how my sister Hazel's delicate emotional state became the center point for our family's world. But these days, my new path meant I no longer had to make myself smaller. I stopped tracking every interaction. I quit analyzing vague, half-animated texts for hidden meaning. I allowed the quiet to expand. Then one afternoon in February, a faint blue envelope appeared in my mailbox. There was no sender listed, only my name scrawled in handwriting I hadn't seen since our childhood. The envelope's corners were worn, as if it had traveled in someone's bag for days before being sent out. Inside, I found a plain card. Without any decorative flowers or elegant print, just Hazel's handwriting, smaller than I remembered. I owe you an apology. Can we talk? There were no justifications or clarifications, only those few words. I read the card twice before placing it on my windowsill. There it remained for 3 days until I finally messaged her. Friday, Tucson p.m., Oak and Lantern Cafe. Her reply was simply, "I'll be there." I arrived early, ordered a cup of mint tea, and chose a table in the back area. When my sister entered, I barely recognized her at first. The polished heels and styled hair she used to wear were gone. She wore a plain gray sweater and no makeup. My hair was twisted up in a loose bun that looked unintentional. When we sat down, she said, "I'm not sure where to begin." Her tone was steady, not trembling. I stayed silent, waiting for her to go on. "I've started therapy," she explained. "In July, Lucas and I are getting a divorce. He hasn't done anything to deserve this." "Exactly," she added. My whole sense of self was based on earning someone else's approval. His, yours, my mother's. I kept silent and just let her speak. I lied, she admitted. Serious things. About you, about your mental health. I was scared his family wouldn't want me there, so I constructed a story where I wasn't the one at fault. And in the process, I let you bear the burden. Emotionally, financially, in every way. I didn't feel any resentment at that point. What I felt was more like an old ache that had faded with the years. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, she went on. I only want you to understand that I recognize it now. All of it. I remained seated for quite some time afterward. We didn't embrace. We avoided any discussion about what lay ahead. However, when Hazel asked if I wanted to look at the early education certificate program she intended to pursue, I agreed with a nod. We hadn't returned to being true sisters. At least, not yet. Still, we were no longer complete strangers either. Somehow, that shift was enough to signal a new beginning. Things feel calm now, though not without a sense of vitality. The dining table I crafted from salvaged timber boasts 8 unique chairs, all filled this evening. My friends share dishes, exchange stories, and top off one another's drinks. Nobody questions my right to join them at the table. Instead, they simply offer me a place. On the far side of the room, Derek Chase meets my gaze with a smile. This time, his smile doesn't imply any expectation, just a simple acknowledgement. Our paths first crossed several months ago at a local tech meetup. I had been tempted to skip the event. He once asked what I enjoyed outside my job, and back then, I didn't have an answer. But that has changed. I entertain guests, offer guidance, express myself through writing, and exist in this world. Once everyone goes, I clean up by washing the dishes in gentle light with warm water. Above the sink, a neatly folded card rests on the shelf, cream-colored, its ink a little blurred. I found it inside a thank you card from a scholarship student just last month. The message inside read, "You were never the fallback. You were the original design." My fingertip trailed over the inscription, "Let them settle." For a long time I surrendered my own spot at the table in the name of love. But these days, I create a table of my own. Every seat is chosen with care, never offered out of apology.